Welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 755, the United States Grand Prix review, or as we like to call it around these parts, the US Grand Prix. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camber. You know why I've asked you here.
You must convince the villagers that I'm harmless.
That's exactly what I need you to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to review the Grand Prix. You know how we do this.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it. Come on, Todd.
That's what we do. But before doing that, I have to introduce my co-host tonight to review the thrilling U.S. Grand Prix. You know him. You love him.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy.
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charsley, the International.
Paul, I should say now in your intro, the championship winning
That's right.
Paul Charsley.
Yes.
It's all very good.
All very winny around here.
Yes.
A lot of winning going
A
on.
lot of winning going on at the Charsley house.
Yeah, because I helped with the McLaren team too, and they won the championship in the GT Celebration Series. So basically,
Awesome.
Two teams I've been involved with this year have won championships.
There's a recurring theme there. You seem to be the least common denominator, Paul.
I'm asking for a raise, Todd. That's all I'm telling you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, congrats to the McLaren team.
Thanks. Yeah. It wasn't as high level as the IMSA stuff, but it's all good stuff. It's all about execution, getting the car to the finish line, even though the grid wasn't as stout as an IMSA. It was good. Yeah.
It's still a W, Paul.
Yeah, and finished it off at Sonoma. Not a bad place to be in October either. So that's where I was last weekend.
Well, Sonoma holds a special place in your heart.
It sure does. Yeah, spent many years there inside turn one, that's for sure. So.
Yeah. Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
Many laps going around there too. So.
You've spent a little time at the Circuit du America.
Yes, I have there too. Yes, I have.
You've driven around that track.
Certainly.
You've enjoyed the S's.
I've enjoyed the S's.
You thought the Mickey Mouse session was a little Mickey Mouse?
I still think it is, but it's a bit better than my initial thoughts on it compared to some other Mickey Mouse sections. Yeah. It's got a couple of challenges.
It does. The interesting thing about this, the track was bumpy, and while that doesn't go well with two wheels, the MotoGP boys, completely understandable. It was bumpy. I think it's fine for four wheels. But the track was delivering a good amount of tire wear and degradation, Paul. It was an issue that really was evidenced early in the weekend. They could tell automatically in those FP1, FP2, tire wear was going to be an issue. Tire degradation was going to be an issue. And I got to be honest with you, Paul, Merck, to me, looked very quick and dominant on Friday and certainly in FP1. And I assumed that the reality is that this has been a Merck track for many years. This was a track they're going to win at. But even to the point where my fantasy GP pick had Lewis Hamilton winning, right?
Yeah, with pole and winning.
Pole. I had him with pole and winning, and I just thought this was going to be their weekend. But come by Saturday, Paul, they seem to be nursing some issues with that chassis, whereas Red Bull, who seemed to be on the back foot on Friday, seemed to solve some of those issues, and that their rear tire wear in particular was quite a bit better or improved come qualifying. And I thought that was a real interesting turn of events because, there was much being made as we went into the weekend about Mercedes' sort of trick chassis where, the rear end dips under speed and under load. I was kind of thinking through my head, could it be a case of that system does work, but certain tracks, depending on how those tracks, those very fast sweeping corners where that car is kind of kicking in to dropping down, not dropping down. Is that an issue? How is this working? Could that be that they had to stiffen up the rear end and because of that made that rear end a little looser, which we saw on Sunday clearly. If you saw Lewis's car, he was, he's battling that rear end. And Lewis, I think, even made a comment that our rear end was just a lot looser than Red Bull's. But it was a real turnaround. But Paul, from the tire wear perspective, bumpy track, sure. But come race day, the ambient was 80 degrees, track temperature 96. That's not the hottest track temps we've ever seen.
Nope. No, I wouldn't
You
say.
know?
Certainly not even there. It can be very
No.
hot. And yeah, they were lucky actually, because I think it was supposed to be warmer. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as the degradation, it could be a combination of just the asphalt, aged asphalt delivering a lot of heat into those tires, wearing pretty hard, abrasive on those tires. Maybe that was a contributor more than just the heat. But due to that wear, it did prompt that this race was a two-stopper, and indeed it was. Most opted for that medium hard strategy. Couple drivers, Yuki, Carlos Sainz, starting on a soft hard combination, and those were the only two that deviated from that. This race, in my mind, Paul, we often talk about F1 for those newer to Formula One. We often talk about F1 is more like a chess game at 200 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And this race was a very tangible example of how F1 truly is like a chess game. It's not a game of slapjack or Texas Hold'em.
There was lots of this going on the computers back there in the garage. That's for sure. Trying to figure out the best way to play that game. Yeah.
Right. So, Paul, if you're you are a sporting manager for a professional race car team. You've done this. You go into every weekend. Paul, you walk into this weekend, let's say you're running Alpha team, you're whatever it may be. You walk into this weekend, you got a bumpy track, it's abrasive, high tire wear, you're struggling with the rear end, struggling to get the tires in the right operating window, you're making compromises on setup, and then you look at tactically, you're thinking, ooh, this is a two-stopper. So as a sporting manager, you're looking at this thinking, boy, we got a hell of a lot of brain work to do to figure out how the hell we're going to get there.
Yeah. But you know what? I like the two-stop strategies because it does, if you're a team with confidence and with know-how, you see that as an opportunity, not as a problem, right? We have the opportunity because, it's not just a one-stopper and everyone's strategies can be very similar. This is our chance to flex our strategic muscles, so to speak, and play the game as perfectly as it can be played. And if you're in a midfield pack, that is a prime opportunity to jump some cars that may be even faster than you just in the strategy alone.
Yeah, it's a good point, because that's exactly what it actually turned into, right? And I would say, certainly in the case of Red Bull, Paul, exactly what you described. It is an opportunity, and being that they lost the lead at the beginning, that's all they had at that point was an opportunity to make those two stops and the strategy work. So let's jump into that real quick. Let's talk about Red Bull. This is your race winner, Max Verstappen, and P1, Sergio Perez, and P3. Now, for Max, Paul, he lost the lead at turn 1. He had a slightly slower, and when I say slightly, I'm talking about like very slightly slower start than Lewis. Lewis had a really good start. And he lost the lead at turn 1. Then he settled in from there, got behind Lewis, and just let that race and strategy come to him, basically, at that point. Interestingly, what I noticed up front, and I'm sure you saw this because you're wickedly smart and much smarter than I am when it comes to this stuff, but interestingly, once Lewis got around him, I thought, Lewis pulled out a little bit, and I thought, oh man, Lewis is going to start walking away from this thing, and it's just going to be a little processional of a race and all that. But he didn't. Max always was thereabouts within a couple of seconds. It was never out of control. Lewis didn't ride off in the distance. Now, I was sitting at home, and it wasn't really ringing alarms for me, but the strategists at Red Bull were going, he's not fast on these mediums.
Yeah.
He's not fast on these mediums. We've got him, and we're there, and we're gonna engage some seriously aggressive strategy here and really capitalize or exploit Lewis's pace on those mediums, right? So he was never that far back. It suggested that the Red Bull cars can follow a little better too than the Mercs. The team at that point chose an aggressive strategy to box him on lap 11 for the undercut, and it worked. Lewis went 3 laps later and came out behind Max. It was an aggressive strategy, and while Lewis was on 8-lap newer tires after the second stop, they perpetuated that strategy. They boxed early for that second, right? And when Lewis went target +8, he was on 8-lap newer tires than Max was. Max started losing some ground, and there was back markers he got hung up behind and all that, and it made you wonder if the Merc strategy with those fresh tires wasn't going to pay dividends here. It really looked like Lewis is reeling him in.
Certainly getting exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting real exciting. He was, it came out. It was 6 seconds, then it was 5, then it was 4, then it was 2, then he was nipping around in that DRS range, and it turns out though, towards the end, I was watching Lewis. I thought, oh man, he's going to get him. He's going to get up to that DRS, and Lewis is going to nail him, and this is going to work out brilliantly with those fresher tires. But it turns out Max had his own game plan going. He brilliantly saved enough tire that he could keep Lewis just outside of the DRS range. And once Lewis did get into the DRS range, he was totally lucky. He was behind Mick Schumacher, and Max got a DRS down one pivotal long front straight that Lewis had a shot at him, but kept Lewis out of there. Lewis needed that DRS to get around him, didn't have that, and Max goes on to win the race. He doubled his points lead. It's now 12 in the Drivers' Championship, and it was a win at a track that Merc is supposed to and has been dominant at. A big win for Max and Red Bull.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, going in, the form book is Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton all over the place at Coda, right? I don't think Mercedes. What did they say? Mercedes hadn't lost a race there in
something
years or since 2013. It's just
13.
Something crazy.
No,
it was
13.
like if there was any track that you would say was a Mercedes track, it seemed like Coda was like built for it, right?
Yep.
I think the evolution of the track and the bumps, etc., had kind of changed things a little bit. Certainly the evolution of the bumps very frequently, as we saw with the MotoGP cars and as the Formula One cars started to figure out during the weekend. I mean, I think the key here is that the Red Bull was just a bit better. And you go into the race and you go into qualifying, and there's drivers are making differences, etc. But you don't really know exactly what you have till everyone starts running, and then the drivers and the strategists and engineers can kind of figure out, okay, where are we? As you said, Lewis wasn't stretching it, and you could kind of see even in qualifying that the rear end of that Mercedes was having trouble, even though Lewis was the guy making a difference in that car.
Oh yeah,
right. The car, the actual Red Bull, I think, was a superior car all weekend, was playing nice with its rear tires. I think Max knew that. As you said, Max doesn't panic. You don't panic if you think you got the fastest car, right?
Right.
Usually. And although it was a close run thing, and I said there is the Lewis factor in there for sure. I mean, we saw where Bottas ended up. I mean, there's how good was Bottas in the Mercedes, right? Compared to Lewis. I mean, miles away, right?
Oh, miles.
So, so I think Bottas was a true barometer of maybe where that car was, and I think Lewis, just pulled it by its what's-its and pulled it up there and was making it work. But I don't think Max had to work as hard, but he had to work very, very smart to make that strategy work properly when he was working his way through that last stint, protecting his rear tires, knowing the strategy that the Mercedes were going to run. As I've always said, you can't just change the strategy with 3 laps to go on how to use your brakes, how to save fuel, how to save your tires, etc. This has to be a plan from the beginning of the stint to the end. Even looking back to the beginning of the race, to the first stop, to the second stop, it's all about managing everything so you can be in the best place you can be for the last 3 laps, which is what they said on the radio, which is all about the last 3 laps, and it certainly was in the end. And I think the Red Bull's ability to keep those tires under it, and Max's, perfection of a drive to protect the rear tires, even though it was probably really tempting when he reached the back markers there at the end to kind of force some issues, right, to get through them. And he did lose time there, but I think, if he'd have pushed the envelope a bit more, he could have taken something out of the tire that he wouldn't have able him to fight with Lewis. I think he made the decision to not force an issue, keep protecting his tires and his rear tires, so that whenever Lewis did get there, he still had a knife to fight with in the end. So even though Lewis closed, he didn't panic, and he just got through him as he needed to do. I mean, blue flags makes it a little easier, but I don't think those guys are fighting for the last point on the in the championship. So they're not just going to pull over and slow down. They're going to give up as little of their own time, and that's going to hurt Max a little bit, which it did, right? So I think, the car was a little better. Max drove the tire and the car and the strategies to perfection. Red Bull ran it great. I think Lewis probably maximized what that car had, and it was so much fun to watch everything kind of ebb and flow when they're pitting on different sequences and just seeing, okay, how's it all going to work out? And Lewis is, charging up. It was a fun deal, but I think Max drove a perfect race, even though he didn't get the start on it. I think he knew what his plan was. I think he knew what he had underneath him, and that he would definitely, barring any issues with traffic or reliability, be right there at the end, no matter what Lewis did.
Yeah, when you watch both those guys in the waning laps and watching Lewis trying to set him up, recharging, trying to get that boost that he need,
Right.
Watching Lewis manage that race and try to overcome whatever deficiencies he had in there. But by the time those two crossed the line, they were over 40 seconds, clear of anyone else.
Right. I wonder,
they were in a world of their own, those two.
Yeah, I actually thought Lewis might go to mediums. But
for the last stint?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they probably made the right decision, that they thought there was.
I'm not sure they had any mediums left.
I thought he did.
Did he?
I thought he did. I thought I looked on that chart before he went that he had 2 new sets of mediums, but
yeah, I didn't remember.
I could be misremembering, but it was an option. I thought they were pushing to have as few laps at the end so they could run a medium strategy. But as you said before, the mediums weren't working that great for the car anyway. So maybe it wasn't an option for performance, let alone longevity of the tire. So.
Right. Yeah. I think they ruled them out because they weren't quick enough on the first stint on those mediums. They weren't fast on the mediums at all.
Yeah. I mean, so the Mercedes was really working the rear hard.
They were.
The Red Bull was way more compliant. So therefore, not using up the tire needlessly.
Yeah. For Sergio, he was under the weather this weekend. And I didn't find that out until after the race when Christian mentioned it. He was under the weather weekend, but a couple laps into the race, his drink bottle stopped early in the race. And when you're already sick and having no drink in that kind of heat and that kind of physical demand in that car, he became physically and mentally exhausted and, most likely dehydrated at that point. So you can forgive him for finishing third. It's a shame because he looked terrific all week long, even under the weather, nearly putting it on pole, Paul. Regardless, Sergio said this was the hardest race of his life. I tend to believe him, but he looked good all weekend. And I think that's the important thing. It's not so much of, he finished third, look, he wasn't feeling well. He had no drinks bottle, no hydration. All of that contribute. That's fine. I got a lot of patience for that. The point here is that he looked damn near to put it on pole.
Right.
Over Max. And looked there about all weekend long, finishes third. This is a resurgent Sergio who is coming to grips with the Red Bull, coming to grips with the program, finding his sea legs. I don't think you can walk away from this weekend not saying this is a great sign for Sergio and Red Bull.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's a real shame about him being sick. Obviously, they probably didn't want to show their hand before the race and tell anyone that he was dealing with that kind of issue. But the drinks bottle was insult to injury at that point, and kudos to him for even lasting the race, quite honestly. I know he got a little bit of grief from the TV reporters saying, "Oh, look at Sergio, he's 40 seconds behind." Well, he could have easily not finished it all, right?
I mean, sure.
You're sick, you're dehydrated, your focus goes away.
He said he wasn't thinking clearly. It was
stamina
difficult.
goes away. I mean, you're just not going to be on the ball. And I think it was great that he even pulled out a podium with that. But it was a shame because he was right on there. And that's exactly where Red Bull want him to be. And then, he played the game right at that first corner where Max got shuffled back and just backed off and let Max go chase after Hamilton. And I guess they say Max was lucky that Sergio was there. Well, no, Sergio earned that spot, and Red Bull choosing Sergio earned them they have that opportunity for Sergio to be able to give Max, the open door to continue on, right? So it's a team effort for sure. So I'm sure Sergio is hopefully recuperating quick, but because he's got to go back to Mexico quick. So
So in a couple of weeks he goes to home Grand Prix, and he always does well there. This is a great race for him. And don't feel bad, Kimi knows your pain.
No, is my drinking, is it emptying the bottle or not?
No, it wasn't. Not for Sergio.
I mean, maybe the large Mexican contingent there raised his game and pushed him through to the end. Hopefully.
They may have.
I'm sure it had an effect.
Yes.
Do you like my pace? You like it?
Yes, Sergio, we did. We loved your pace, my friend.
Yep.
Let's talk about Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton in P2, Valtteri Bottas in P6. Now, Lewis had a slightly better start than Max. Had a really good start, and then allowed him to take the lead, stay on the inside by staying on the inside at turn 1, driving Max wide, off the track. Max had plenty of runoff, so he went off the track, came back on. I wouldn't have done anything different if I was Lewis. I would have done the same thing. I think it was great. Initially, it looked like he may be putting some distance between him and everyone else, but then Max never got that far out of sight. And when Red Bull tried their aggressive undercut, Merck had to react quickly. And given that they weren't as quick on the mediums as they had hoped, they lost the lead when that happened. Now, Lewis's second stop, he went target +8. So he was 8 laps on his stint. On fresher tires, he went 8 laps beyond that on his stint, and Merck banked on those fresher tires to be the real chance. And to be fair, it seemed like it may have worked, but as he got closer and closer to Max and was really working it hard, I loved watching Lewis drive in those moments. It was just, oh my gosh, it was just stunning.
He was on it, especially through the S's. He was hustling.
And he was fighting the rear end of his car.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
He was getting everything he could out of it. Yeah. Bleeding that sucker dry.
Yeah. He was. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, Lewis is on it, man. But he closed in on Max, who was, Max, as we mentioned, he got hobbled by some back markers, right? So, but when Lewis got there, he just couldn't follow as closely to Max. And that's kind of characteristic of the Merc, this year. It doesn't follow cars it doesn't like to, it's usually leading, so it doesn't normally have to. But Max had managed his tires perfectly to have enough left to keep Lewis out of the DRS. And that's what Lewis needed to get around Max. Lewis said that the Red Bull just seemed to have more stable rear end of their car. And you could see that from Lewis's onboard shots. But with all the talk, as I mentioned, about Merck's trick suspension and nursing possible engine issues, I wonder if this track layout just didn't lend itself to their bag of tricks, right? It was just a difficult race. It's nothing. Let me put it this way. Lewis didn't leave anything on the table. I mean, he was in full attack mode from the green flag.
Yeah.
It's just that the car wasn't quite there. Red Bull had a slight advantage over it in the way that its rear end worked, the what it did to its tires. It was just slightly better, but in the hands of Sergio Perez, in the hands of anyone else, Lewis would have won that. In the hands of Max, he just executed, but it's nothing untoward with Lewis. Lewis looked fantastic all day long.
No, for sure. Yeah, he, as we mentioned before, he drove an impeccable race and I think squeezed everything out of it he could. What they had to do with that Merc to make it, compliant or to not be bottoming out on the bumps and etc., I think may have compromised it a little bit. I think the circuit layout is perfect for it, but the circuit condition was the differentiator there. So to get beaten at your track, we're only a few races away and you're like, okay, Merc track, Red Bull track, I'm not sure what track, right? So this is one you would have hung your hat on being a Mercedes track. So they've got some work to do with the car. I mean, it's so fun to see two very, very, very good drivers in two very, very good cars going at it and then being so close. I mean, week after week, I'm glad there was no clashes. I'm glad, Lewis got ahead. He did a great job. So I think it's just going to bode well. I think it's going to be nip and tuck all the way to the end here. So prepare to be entertained, I think.
Yeah, I did too. I think, like I said, ultimately the team said they just weren't good in the medium tires in the first stint. And that did play out as Lewis tried to get away from Max, just couldn't. And Max's early stop, you wonder if I'm curious, and I'm sure when Lewis took the lead but didn't start pulling away from Max on the mediums, I have to think that with Max's early stop, you wonder if Red Bull didn't read those tea leaves at that moment and say, okay, wait a minute. He's not walking out. He's not putting the pace and distance between us that we're thinking he would at Coda.
Yeah.
Let's get aggressive. Let's exploit that. Let's pit on, let's box on lap 11. And then the second stop, Paul, it was all really about protecting track position at that point. It wasn't, I mean, Red Bull could have went longer on that second stop, but they chose to keep them short.
I did think they pit boxed early. It made me very, very nervous.
Did it? Yeah.
Honestly, for Max, how early they stopped for the second stop. It's like, woof, that's a long way to go, man.
Yeah. But you had to have confidence. They had to have confidence that
Let's know what's going on.
that those hards were going to deliver a second set of hards. And Christian said it was a close run thing because he got the first hards they took off were almost down to the cords, And he said that, but you'd have to have super confidence that Max can manage that 8 laps older tires, right?
Right.
It's tough.
Now, the one thing I was thinking, what could Lewis have done? He's still in a car that's maybe a little inferior. I'm not sure it would have worked, but he could have backed the field up a little bit, and not made it, so easy for Max to undercut it. And, because sometimes if you can back the field up, if you've got confidence you can stay ahead, but do it at a slower pace, you allow the midfield to get in the game, right? And then that makes it difficult for Max to pit early and undercut because he's in a whole mess of traffic or got a lot more cars to fight his way through to make the undercut work. So.
Would you have wanted to do that knowing that also puts Perez in play for a potential undercut as well? If you'd have backed him up a little bit with Lewis, Max, and Perez.
Yeah. I think it had the same effect,
Yeah.
I mean, but it might force Red Bull to do something different. Obviously with Red Bull, they pitted Max and then they pitted Perez before Lewis went in, and that was the key. The undercut on Perez was something that Hamilton couldn't handle, and so they had to pit Hamilton then. I think he was probably going to still go longer, but because the Red Bulls pitted so early, it kind of forced his hand to do that. And then that's when they ended up on the back foot instead of the forward foot. So I don't know.
Well, it's a good point because they were only target +3. No, they were only 3 laps longer than Max.
Right.
On that first stint. So you're right. It was the boxing of Perez that forced Lewis' hand. He had to come in just 3 laps after Max.
Right.
But on the second stop, Perez was out of the picture, so he could go +8 in that case.
Yeah, it's a hard game to play. I think, I think probably the fact is that the Lewis and the 2 Red Bulls were just so much quicker than the midfield, that it would be very difficult to back him up that much. Probably, but I was just spitballing in my head. What could he have done different to make it work, even though he didn't have the best car? But that was kind of all I came up with. But it's a dangerous game to play, obviously, at a track where the DRS zones are long and frequent.
Yeah, exactly. For Bottas, he took another engine change and started from 9th, so he had an engine penalty. I was just wondering, thinking out loud, if that wasn't a sort of recon, sort of engine change operation for a potential change for Lewis, because that's his 6th engine. I don't know why they're keep changing engines on Valtteri at this point.
Yeah.
And there were other Merc-powered teams that changed engines this weekend too. It led some people to say that there's an engine issue. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not in the paddock, but that there's an engine issue that Mercedes is battling this year. And the talk certainly is that Lewis may have another potential change coming up, which would be difficult. But I think when they press Christian on, would you guys need in it? He's like, I don't know, So yeah, I think they're pretty tight-lipped at this point. Valtteri said he did about as good as we could. I like to use the we or as they could.
As he could, yeah.
Yeah. They said, they said they did about as good as they could. It's really bonus. But I'm curious about the hot conditions that he talked about, as well as if it worked against Mercedes as it has in the past, although I wouldn't say that it was the hottest weather we've seen or even hottest track temps. So not quite sure. I think it's easy to say, yeah, it's that hot weather that always favors the Red Bull and it works against the Mercedes. This wasn't the hottest of weather,
No, but I think the mixture of the heat and the abrasion of the track.
Abrasion, yeah, right.
Kind of brings up that equation.
It's a 1-2 punch, maybe. Yeah.
It's working the tire. That's what you're talking about with heat, right?
Yeah.
It's like how do we manage the tire over the length and how much heat gets built up and degradation. I think the combination of fairly hot and high deg track.
Not just the track temp, but it's also the track wear rate and abrasiveness of that track. Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, P4, Carlos Sainz, and P7. Charles had a good start and had enough pace to keep everyone behind him all day. He didn't have enough pace to mount any sort of challenge to Perez in third, but still hung in there, delivered a great amount of points to the team. This is critical in their battle. A P4, I want to say that he's putting together a string of P4 finishes here in a very quiet way that not a lot of people are talking about, but Charles is doing a hell of a job in a car that quite honestly isn't really being developed at this point.
Yeah, no, development. That's the thing. Hey, remember when Mercedes said they'd stop development after race 3?
Right.
Yeah, and what did we say? Not buying into that game. And sure enough, they're developing all the way to the end. And I'm not, I don't know what Ferrari are doing. They definitely don't want to be beaten by McLaren more than anybody else on the grid, right? So I think there may be still some.
They're bringing some old upgrades.
They're still working on some stuff. Yeah. So but Charles did a phenomenal job, as you say, kind of silent assassin over there. You're not really noticing his race. He's not in with the lead bunch, but he's way ahead of the rest of the midfield. So, which is, a stout amount of talent in cars and drivers. So, it was a great job, but not one that was much heralded because, he was doing it all in his lonesome.
Yeah, got lost in the mix. Carlos had a tough day, losing out to Ricciardo at the start. Had to stop early to get off those soft compounds. He was ruining having to start on them. But once he boxed, he did fight back. He fought Dan hard all day long and eventually fell to lost a position to a recovering Bottas for 7th to finish. At one point in the second stint, he let Dan by him thinking it was Charles, he said. So all the cars...
Thinking it was Lando,
Or thinking it was Lando,
Right.
So all the cars switching places back and forth. A lot gets confusing for sure. And all the teams, taking and giving back positions because everybody was running wide. And you can understand
Track
that.
Limit mania.
Yeah, I know. It gets confusing.
Yeah.
But it's about as good as you can get or expect from a team focused pretty much on the 22 car at this point. And to leave the track that doesn't normally flatter this team with a points haul like that takes the fight to McLaren in the constructors' point, Paul. It was a good haul of points because very quietly Charles and Carlos have brought that team back to just 3.5 points between the two teams.
Right. And it looked like McLaren had a runaway already, right?
I thought McLaren was really running away from it.
It sure looked like it. It's like they've done it. Ricciardo wins and Norris had won. Obviously, probably would have been a lot different story. But so a bit advantageous for Ferrari, but they are super competitive with McLaren. It is a good fight to see, just as tight and feisty as the Red Bull Mercedes fight, really. But so it's fun. And Charles, obviously we talked about his race. Sainz had a bit of a brawl, all race long, really back and forth. He had the wrong tire. He's in the wrong place. He's given the wrong. It was a tough day at the office for Carlos, but he still came away with enough points to keep edging closer to the McLaren total, which is obviously their goal.
Yeah, absolutely. McLaren, Lando Norris P8, Dan Ricciardo P5. Dan likes Coda. He likes America. He had a
Sure
good,
does. Got a
doesn't
terrible
he?
American accent though.
Yeah, he's terrible at that. Um, Dan had a good start, swapped places with Sainz 3 times on the opening lap. And then when Carlos had better tires, the two of them battled hard again after that second stop all afternoon. Dan did a great job, though, of keeping a quicker Ferrari behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And that may have surprised them a little since Ferrari haven't been as strong at Coda in the past. So for McLaren, I'm thinking, what the heck's going on with Ferrari? Why are they so competitive? But Dan was able to keep that Ferrari behind him. Some good defensive. I mean, Dan knows how to do defensive driving.
Yeah.
He just does. And he did some good defensive driving, kept Carlos behind him, ends up in P5, trying to damage limitation for Charles up in fourth and Carlos. So good result from Dan, besting his teammate. It's good to see him bounce back, get excited, and be in the mix.
Yeah. Feisty race by Ricciardo. It's the old adage, never give up, right? I mean, it's so easy to think, oh, the quicker cars, he's coming. But if you can hold them off long enough, they can take some sheen off their tires, and you can actually hold that position. Hard to do in DRS land world nowadays, but it's even harder, So for him to do it was an incredible feat for him, and he benefited from those points. And that was a real action man kind of drive from Daniel, whereas Lando just kind of hummed it along. It was close. But had a pretty sedate race compared to the wars that Daniel was in.
Yeah, he did. Lando was pretty much sitting in the perfect spot to capitalize if Dan or Carlos had a bobble. But
that old 3 wide move on the end of the back.
Yeah.
That was fun to watch.
I thought Lando was going to get them both. I did too. I thought he was just going
to crash, but he didn't. So
I thought he was going to nip around both of them and take him, but he didn't.
No.
But so anyway, he got to watch that Ricciardo Sainz battle, and he even gave Sainz a bit of a run, a time or two, but then lost out on a recovering Bottas. Lando said he could have done a better job defending. He said that was one area he thought he learned a little bit, and it was difficult with the wind and the temperatures that seemed to favor the Ferrari instead of the McLaren. So, yeah. Let's talk about AlphaTauri. Pierre Gasly at DNF. Yuki Tsunoda P9. Pierre had a scare on the moment, so he went out on the installation lap, got on the grid. They were taking the engine cover off. Apparently, they had a sensor issue. Karun was just right on it, so Karun was all over that. But
Will Buxton was having a conniption on the F1 TV thing.
Was he?
They had the cameras going, oh, look to the owl, because you got all the Gasly team trying to block, and as soon as there was a gap, they stuck the cameras in it. It's like, that's a little over the top, It's like you're working for F1 and you're like trying to spy on the F. I mean, I get trying to get a good shot, but the way they were doing it was a little outrageous. And my wife was watching Will. She's like, "What is wrong with that guy?"
He's like a Jack Russell Terrier.
I mean, he was just. I know he loves America, but he was literally, just his leg was just shaking the whole time, and he's hyperventilating in the mask. It's like, oh man, just talk slower. You're like making us all nervous, for crying out loud. I think you're gonna like hyperventilate and fall over. But
And the sad thing, he'll be back in a pub in London, just bad mouthing Americans and talking about how his Yankees are pathetic. That's hilarious. So anyway, he had that scare on the grid, but they were able to get it going. But then he had to retire. He had suspension problems. I thought, if there's suspension problems, I think that's interesting, because Yuki had been banging the curbs all day long. I mean, almost like shortcutting corners at T9.
And also, you got to believe that rear suspension is probably very similar to the Red Bull's rear suspension too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, Yuki was banging him all day, but it didn't impact him. Yuki had a great race. He scored points, some good defensive and overtakes, really both. I thought Yuki did a fabulous job, not only scored points, but he started on softs just like Carlos did, and he made those. He managed them. That was not that was not an easy strategy to start on those softs. Those softs just weren't there, and he still managed those softs, went soft, hard, and put in a great race to P9. So good points. I think this is probably his best race I've seen him do.
I would say, yeah, he's he's had a lot of downs, not many ups, and he was feisty and he fought it. And I actually did think, you were a bit handicapped by starting on the softs. Could have easily just disappeared backwards. But yeah, he was in amongst it the whole time and doing very good defensive driving. That seems to be definitely something he's good at. He was able to hold off. Hamilton was able to hold off some other people in this race too, and it benefited it. I mean, it's just 2 points, but it's a hard-earned 2 points, and it's really something to give him, hopefully, rebound a little confidence, because even in the things he says in the press, and I didn't think I'd be signed for next year. He knows he's kind of there not because of his pure talent right now, even though he has a lot of potential talent and speed. He's been making too many mistakes that normally, if you were just hiring Yuki on, just on his talent alone, you probably wouldn't be around next year. So he's got Honda behind him, which is helping him, but that's only going to take you so far. So he really needs to use that time that he's been given to turn it around and become the best Yuki he can be. And this was probably something that we saw today.
Yeah, I hope so. I thought it was a really good race for him, and his defensive driving. He does seem pretty good at that. Remember a couple of weeks ago he held Lewis back there for quite a while.
Yeah.
And look, anyone will tell you holding off Lewis Hamilton is no easy task. I mean, that's difficult. And it's not the kind of it's not the Mazepin defensive.
Not the choppy,
driving.
Not the choppy.
I mean, touch wood. I mean, hopefully he doesn't resort to that. But it's been relatively fair but aggressive defensive.
Yeah, it's a skill. We before in the podcast before DRS came around. Yeah. It was one of the things I really admire in drivers. Not just raw speed, but the ability to hold another car off and place it in the right place without making mistakes. And it's a skill that's nearly lost with DRS intervention. But so good for him. Yeah.
Aston Martin, Lance Stroll P12, Sebastian Vettel P10. Lance and Latifi got into it at the start. That dropped Lance back with a damaged wing. And he tried basically to make as much of his race he could. He came back to recover 12th. So a pretty ho-hum effort there. And then Vettel ran a long first and second stint, Paul, like Lewis. And in the case of Aston, I think it kind of worked for Seb doing that. Back in the midfield, he was recalled that from an engine change penalty. So to come all the way back and nab a point, running long on that fresh rubber, I think that kind of worked for him. And then he had there was that late race spin by Raikkonen that certainly helped.
That helped out a lot. Yeah,
it gave him a point, but still, I think it did kind of work. But not a track favoring that Aston Martin for sure.
No, sure wasn't, was it? Yeah, I don't think they were very confident going in there into the race, etc. And I think Vettel gave it everything he's got. He made some good passes out there for sure. And Stroll's contact really hurt him a lot. And the nose changes seemed to kind of long.
It did, yeah.
That?
He spun.
Who else had a no change? Someone else, didn't it?
Let's see, was it Ocon?
Yeah, maybe it was Ocon, but neither one were very fast in the pit lane. They need to get practicing that and really put him Stroll behind. And
Stroll was at the back at that point, and then
that's right.
trying to recover back up. I mean, that was always going to be a tall order. So I mean, to get back up to 12th is a good call, but just not.
I think I think Vettel had a good race, and
he did.
The car wasn't the best car to race with, but that fight between them and the Alphas was pretty entertaining unto itself.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Alpha, Kimi had a battle with Alonso that saw him run wide and became an example of Alpine's defense when Alonso ran wide on, was it Carlos? Who was he at when he ran wide to make a pass?
Yeah.
And Alan Permane.
Yes, he said.
Alan, he was like, back. Yes, Alonso. Yeah, now that's how you do it.
Yeah. Oh, I started watching the Alonso show on Netflix.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Or on Amazon. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And big correction. I had a complete a senior moment because I think in my mind I stumbled onto it, but my friend Steve Warren told me he told me about it, and he's right. And he called me. He said, "Hey, you didn't stumble on that. I told you about that show." And I was like, "Yeah, that's right. You must have, because when I went to watch it, I started on season 2 for some reason, episode 1, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. I'm 2 episodes in. I need to go back, and I didn't know that. I thought this was season 1, so I went back and looked at season 1, and I already watched the first episode.
Yeah.
So it's hell getting old, folks. I'm in the middle of moving. I'm moving house.
Are, yeah.
As Paul Charsley, the consummate British person, would say, I'm moving house. That's what you call it, right? Moving.
Good
house.
luck to that.
Yeah. So yeah,
we'll see a whole new background soon.
You will, in a
maybe
week
by
or
next
so.
week, I guess, huh?
Yes. I moved this week, and hopefully, I'll have my office. It maybe not be in its finished state, but at least hopefully everything will work.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a bit of a battle that Kimi had. Alan Permain arguing on behalf. The clash cost Kimi some of his body parts on the underfloor, but he said that while the first stint was good, and he was in for some points. Kimi said that the second stint was a lot more difficult. They lost a lot of time and they ran out of tire much faster on that second stint than they did on the first. So, and then he had that late race.
And he still
spin.
he went medium hard as well.
Yeah. And so, and then he went for, or he had that spin, right?
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah. So that wasn't good. For the Keemster, who at this point, could be phoning it in, but I thought he was putting some scrappy battles out there.
He was, the fight with Alonso was
funny.
really entertaining.
Yeah.
I loved it, and he held his ground, and they're banging side pods and stuff like that. That was phenomenal stuff. And he's definitely not giving it in. 240 plus guys, I guess, still got it, and it was that was very entertaining. But I'm glad Kimi didn't give it up, because he's had a tendency to not make it easy, but also not necessarily fight it all the way down to the last inch, of late. So I think Alonso,
talked about that,
it being Alonso, maybe had something to do with it too.
Maybe, because we've talked about that in the past. We've talked about it with Kimi. He's a gentleman racer. You're not going to get stupid crap out of him typically.
Yeah.
And, he's always trying to race fair anyway. And there have been some moments where you and I have talked about in the past and been a little critical that he could have been a little more aggressive.
Right.
And defending at least,
Yeah.
And certainly passing, and he hasn't. But Sunday he was, I thought.
Yeah, I'm sure he enjoyed it, even though ended up with, at the end, is he going to be worried how many points he scores this year? Probably not,
No.
right? I mean, he's not in a car that's going to win races, and so he's just out there to entertain himself, really, to the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty sure he doesn't like the fact that he made a mistake and spun off, but I'm sure he liked fighting it with Alonso. I'm sure that was a lot of fun for him.
Yeah.
How the that's possible?
I don't know. Let's see. Antonio Giovinazzi and Alonso then engaged and swapped places a few times for a lap or two, but regardless, they were in the hunt for points and may have gotten one had Kimi not spun. But Gio said he was trying to hold off Alonso, and he just didn't have the pace to do it. But he said it was really good to be racing someone like Alonso against someone like Alonso. And they just didn't have the tires in the second stint on Gio's car either. The hards just weren't working on the Alphas.
Yeah, I mean, he's fighting for his ride. I don't know if there's anything he can do to hold his ride, quite honestly. I mean, we've been surprised he's stayed along this long. And he has his moments, and I'm sure it is fun to fight against Alonso, but he's kind of nearly in a forced Kimi Räikkönen mode where he's trying to just get these last few races and do something with them,
Yeah, I would imagine come December when he starts calling Alpha to figure out what their program is for 22, it's going to be...
Yeah. Boom, boom. The number has been changed.
Right. Yeah. Or that's exactly. It might be more like this.
Hello, this is United States calling. Are we reaching?
So anyway, Let's talk about Alpine. 2 DNFs. This hurts. Hurts. Alonso, DNF. Ocon, DNF. A day to forget for Alpine, who failed to finish the race with either car. The day started pretty tough for Ocon. He had to box early on with wing change, and having had it got clipped by one of the Alphas. And so Esteban then tried to recover from the back, and they stopped the car with mechanical issues, and so it was game over early on. For Alonso, he got into a punching match with the 2 Alphas all day long, including a series of off-track passes by both teams, and the frustrations after being told to box with a broken rear wing is just brutal. Yeah, it's a shame because this team seemed like it had some points possibly in hand here and just couldn't survive the race to get them. And
yeah,
brutal.
Yeah, I'm not sure they had the pace to get points, really.
I think Alonso maybe
he was having to force it, and maybe he could have, but you know,
it would have been a ragged point.
Ragged points for sure, and it would have been one. You know, I think, you know, whatever the past few races, they've been a bit more handy, but this track just didn't suit them. And
Coda doesn't like Alpine.
Does not. No. So I think they weren't really in a good place to get anything out of it, but at least Alonso made some good moments for us to watch.
He did.
Yeah.
Williams. Woo! Yeah, George Russell in P14, Nicholas Latifi P15. Nick got into an altercation with Stroll up front right at the turn.
I want it now! What's the matter with those twats down there?
Yes. He was being sandwiched by both the Haas cars and really had nowhere
Never
to go.
something you want to be in a sandwich with Mazepin. I'll tell you that much.
You don't want to exactly be in the same zip code. So anyway, you know, it's kind of hard to blame Nick. He didn't really have anywhere to go at that point, and unfortunately tagged Stroll. Nick had to box early on. Earlier certainly than they wanted to, and that meant that the second and third stints for him were much longer than they wanted, and it would just there's no recovery for him at that point.
Yeah, he had a good starting spot, but obviously it went bad very, very quickly. So after that, he was kind of in a typical Williams Latifi role in the race.
Doing your standard Latifi thing, I see. For George, he had a great start, jumped up 6 places, and then that was about it. I mean, that's all he had. He just couldn't hold on to the positions, couldn't hold on to the points, and his other cars came through. He just it is what it is, and he was kind of like, that's about all we had today.
Yep.
So
he said start at the back because the engine changed, right? So got a good jump, but that still wasn't a jump that would take you into the points. And not a Williams track either, evidently.
No, Coda doesn't like Williams. Doesn't like Haas F1 either. Mick Schumacher in P16, Nikita Mazepin and thanks for the correction. Somebody was chastising and scolding me for all the mispronunciations. And
what are you mispronouncing, Haas or Schumacher?
Mazepin.
Oh yeah, well we do that on purpose.
Yeah, right. We're Yankees. We just butcher names. That's what we do. It's nothing untoward. We don't mean anything by it, but it's just the way it comes out.
I kind of do.
Yeah. Let's see. Mick's biggest moment of the race, Paul, was actually being in front of Max as a blue flag back marker, which gave Max some DRS just when Lewis had achieved DRS, and this sort of neutered that charge that Lewis was mounting over one of the straights. So that was Max's big claim to fame, or Mick's big claim to fame. Mick was catching Latifi though in the end, and he said he felt like he could have got it. He had a couple more laps.
Maybe that's why he kept pushing, but ultimately I figured he would literally get out the way, which he didn't really. You know,
right.
I mean, he just kept pushing forward and only really gave up, you know, the back marker status when he had to, rather than when he could have at the earliest convenience. I would have thought on the back straight he could have backed all the way off and just let them both go for it. But he didn't do that. Kept pushing forward, and so kind of became an intrinsic part of the last 2 laps.
Yeah, absolutely. Nikita didn't have any fun stuff like that, but here's Nikita's fun for the day. His headrest came off in his car in turn 2 on the first lap. So he had to box, and that was pretty much game over for the rest of the day. So, Nikita. I just feel like it's not going to be very long we're going to be hearing.
I just have a meal time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was it about Haas.
Yeah.
Anything else to add, Paul?
No.
It's kind of at that point. Okay. Let's hand out some awards. The first award of the race is always Move of the Race.
Seriously, Todd?
Yes. Seriously. All right, Move of the Race. Who'd you have, Paul?
Yeah, I thought there was a few good moves over there. Ricardo
Yeah,
was
there was.
involved in some stuff. We saw the Alonso stuff. I'm going to give it to Vettel on the outside of turn 8 on Russell, I believe it was.
Nice. Yeah.
It was not just making that move, but they, we were talking about the Mickey Mouse section. There is some build up through that Mickey Mouse section to give the opportunity to make that move in 18, and Vettel executed perfectly, which he's been known not to do sometimes, but it's a ballsy move to go around the outside of there. It really is, and so I was highly entertained by that one.
Well, that's good. I like it. So,
thanks.
I mean, you're saying that Vettel's kind of okay,
a little bit crashy. Yeah.
Wait,
especially if he's on the inside.
No, you're saying Vettel's a little.
There you go.
That's what Vettel is. Okay. All right. All right. My move of the race, I'm giving it to the Red Bull strategy team. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Read it perfectly. Super aggressive. That was just. Yeah,
they knew what they had, and they used it to its full potential for sure.
They absolutely knew where they were. And it was brilliant execution. All right. Next up, Donkey of the Race.
We'll do it live.
All right, Paul.
Now, I wish I could find it because, when we went to Coda for the first race, it was a whole big festival, right? You, me, and Grace were there, and they literally had like the life-size donkey pinatas around the track. And I remember having, a photo taken with it. I don't know where that went, that photo, but.
Do you remember the person had a donkey there, a live one?
A live one too, yeah.
And we went up and we're like, hey, it's a donkey. Is it a burro? Is it a jackass? I don't know.
No, you're the jackass. Whoa, hey.
Easy. I don't farm. I'm just saying.
All right. So unfortunately, I can't find that picture because that'd be a great one to put up. But the donkey, I'm going to give it to the bus service. Coda. Watching it from afar, I'm like, kind of glad I didn't get involved in that whole schmozzle trying to get to the track, and the 100 bus drivers not showing up, and the bus lanes not being open for easy ingress. And that I don't know why tracks seem, and it's not just Coda, right? They have so difficulty getting people in and out, and parking was sold out supposedly, or maybe it was shrunk. I don't know if they had less options there, but a lot more people had to be bussed in, and when 100 buses don't show up, that makes you quite late, I would imagine. So I'm sure some people were very frustrated by that whole issue. Yeah,
they were. And at first I was thinking, well, it's been a little while, maybe they're rusty. But then on the other side, if those numbers are correct and there was 140,000 people, it's a lot of bodies to haul around.
It's a lot of people,
it's just all sort of a perfect storm. So apologies for those fans that were out there. I got to say, apart from that, I think Coda represented very well. And so I thought it was great. I thought, 400,000 over the weekend and estimated 140,000. I know they kind of a little loose with those numbers. But anyway, I mean, those are in British Grand Prix fan territories, folks.
Right.
And nobody does it like the British. I'm sorry, but they don't. And to be on equal footing with the kind of numbers that you see at Silverstone is amazing. Now, yes, America's a very, very, very large place with hundreds of millions of people, and I get it. But still, that was a really, really good showing.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and it's and they need it just like Silverstone needed it.
Oh yeah,
Coda is it's a F1 track, but it's an F1 track that struggles financially.
does.
And
Well,
they
and
need,
and Paul, they don't have a contract signed for next year, so
right.
that is an asterisk
I
on
wonder
the
what's going to work with
calendar.
that because it was a 10-year contract, right?
It was,
But then they
yeah,
canceled one of the years, so they've only technically only have 9 races.
yeah, true,
So I'm sure there's
true.
some way of, you know,
Yeah,
buying in another year without anyone losing face. Because I think the
right,
best thing that Coda could have done was have what they had. They had a great race. They had a fantastic
yeah,
turnout. You know, the weather was perfect. You know, I don't think there's anyone in the F1 ownership that would not want to be back there. And so it kind of gives Coda maybe a little bit of leverage.
bargaining leverage. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think so. I
yeah,
mean, you know, why we say, oh, we've had the best, you know, big turnout. Oh, we're in there. We're not going back because we just wanted to charge too much. I mean,
yeah.
how do you play that one? You know,
I
so
would think Bobby Epstein, as a older, wiser chap, have seen and talked to a lot of F1 teams, kind of has a good understanding of what kind of contracts are getting done now.
right.
During COVID and the concessions that were made and who got concessions on their contracts and for how much. And I would think that he and his lawyers would be really, shaking those things down. So anyway,
Yep.
but great for the fans. You guys looked, for all of you that attended the race, you looked terrific on TV.
And it was a good
Um,
mismatch of who you were supporting. There was Ferrari. It wasn't just all Ferrari.
yeah,
There was a lot of McLaren stuff there for sure.
yeah,
Obviously, a lot of Perez, Red Bull, Max. I
yeah.
think it's
Lewis,
probably
yep,
the spread of fan support was all the way down the grid,
it
you know,
was.
and so it was really cosmopolitan crowd. So
Yeah.
it was great that everyone went there and made the effort and pulled off a spectacular Grand Prix for
Yeah,
sure.
you guys, all of you look fantastic on camera, and all the shots. And you'll go back and watch it when you get home. But all the shots of the grandstands and the fans were having the best time, and
Hmm.
you all looked absolutely wonderful. And it was great to see you all there. So thanks for putting that in and supporting F1. Couldn't be more proud of all of you.
Although I heard that the hats and the key fobs were still that expensive still.
I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were. My donkey of the race is the celebrities that wouldn't talk.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, really? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I think if you're a celebrity and you're being invited to the race by one of the teams or something, and you're being given passes to be on the
A
grid and
privilege
in the
where,
paddock
yeah,
and all of
yeah.
this stuff, that you should also have to do media and at least talk to the media. Walking
least.
around with an entourage, pushing and shoving Martin Brundle out of the way, and then
Yeah.
eventually waiting for some guy that looks like Draco and Malfoy pushing Martin out of the way and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking to a guy who's been calling Formula One for a long time, who's a professional race car driver and a legend in his own right, and you're
Yep.
shoving him out of the way for who? Come on,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah,
And
not cool.
and then everybody said on the broadcast, Ben Stiller's not doing any media, so we can't talk to him. Kudos to Ben Stiller for actually taking time and answering questions. I know he didn't want to meet with the press, but he did, and he met with Martin anyway, and he was there with his son. And then Rory McIlroy also took time to talk to the press. So good, good on him. But man, the other people were just rude.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm just not starstruck like that. I couldn't care less. I'm just not one of those people. So, I mean, I rode in a van with Matt LeBlanc sitting next to me, and he was
I won't
starting
be
to.
starstruck either, but
Yeah, I wasn't. Matter of fact, I disagreed with him, and it kind of pissed him off because he was like going on. Well, Roman Grosjean and I are real tight. I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "And this is that." And I said, he started telling me how F1 worked, and I was like, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way." He's like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, I know Roman." Okay, well, good for you. That's fine.
yep.
Now it leaves us with the last word: drive the race. Good God!
Get down.
All right,
My
Paul.
cookie down.
Good. Yeah. Who'd you have drive the race?
I got Max. I had to give it to Max. I think it was,
What?
not just because winning a race, but how he won the race and how difficult that was, and how he had to drive that last stint was super impressive.
No doubt.
It was really cool to see him and Lewis just trying to get everything they could out of the car and time everything perfectly so they could be at the sharpest end of the field. And Max did it, and he did a great job under a lot of pressure with Lewis bearing down on him.
Yeah, he didn't crack.
No, he's not cracking. Have you
No.
seen him crack recently?
No, I haven't.
No, he
seems pretty unflappable. Even when Lewis put him in the wall at 150 miles an hour, it kind of got he's pissed off, but he was pretty unflappable about the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
He's a rare breed, Paul.
Yeah, he is. He is. It's fun seeing the evolution, Max Verstappen. Yeah.
It has. He went from first lap nutter to, this is serious stuff. All right. Let's see. I agree with you. Max is my pick too. Let's do some mailbag.
You've got mail.
First up, Miles asks, Paul, is it easier to save fuel or tires and still maintain a competitive lap time?
That's a great question.
That's a good question.
That is a really good question. And it kind of is track dependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're talking about an abrasive track like that, very hard to, nurse those tires and get anything out of them, So it is track dependent on the surface, how much grip is there, how much deg is there going on there. I mean, ultimately, I would say it's easier to, they come hand in hand a little bit. Because if you're lifting and coasting and you're just kind of nursing on the throttle coming out of the corners, that's tendency not to overwork the tire anyway. But I would say fuel saving is probably the easiest to do because you can really make an opportunistic use of the throttle without actually minimizing anything. All you're really doing is not wasting fuel rather than just using fuel, if that makes any sense, right? You're getting throttle perfect, even lift and coast. Even if you're not lifting and coasting, you still save fuel just by really getting the perfection on when you really need to get on the power and how much can you get on the power without over torquing the wheel and just kind of wasting the fuel because you've just kind of overworked the tire as well. But I would say fuel a little bit, they both come in hand, but it is also track dependent on how the ebb and flows also.
Yeah, great question, Miles.
That is.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, and I was curious to see what Paul would say. I mean, I would like to have an opinion on that, but I don't because I'm not a professional race car driver. Paul is, so I don't know.
Big difference between saving tires and fuel at Monza versus fuel and tires at Coda as well. So.
Right. Let's see. Oh, Paul, I had a late entrance.
A late.
Not in your notes, so I'm going to read it to you.
Oh my God! Kulik. And I prepared so well for all the other stuff.
I know, Steve. I know. So Stephen Kulik, I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name, Stephen. It's either Kulik or Gulik. He asked this. Question: after watching the U.S. race, Maz finished the race 87.5 seconds behind the next place driver, Mick Schumacher. Even given the time for the extra pit stop due to the headrest coming loose, he was still on average over a second a lap slower than the next car. Not sure if there was damage to the car or not, but my question was this. Is there ever a time in any series where race control will say a car is lapping too slow, like a damaged car, lack of skill, etc., and is a danger to the rest of the field and force it to retire? Or should there be something like 107% rule for qualifying, but for the race? So, Paul,
yes,
what say you?
Yes. I mean, does happen. Mazepin was not even close to being that far off the pace where he was a hindrance to the race. A second off. If you look back in Formula One history, there was 8-10 seconds between the fastest Formula One and the slowest because, there was amateurs coming in with money, and it's a lot harder to actually get to F1 now. And even though, Mazepin here is a guy buying his seat, he still had to go through a lot of rigors to be able to get there, right? So he still has to be pretty talented and pretty fast to even be allowed to get a super license. So a lot easier than in the days where someone could just kind of show up in their March 711 and, just kind of throw their stickers on the car and go drive around. So the differential is a lot tighter nowadays than it has been in the past. But when we see it sometimes at places in the endurance racing, Daytona, etc., Nürburgring, where it's a pro-am situation, and sometimes these ams can be very am. And I have seen someone being told, okay, you need to park that guy, get him out of the car, and replace him, because, you know, especially in sports cars where there's a differential in speed just with the cars alone, then you put an amateur into a GT car and you've got, you know, Magnussen bearing down on you about 50 miles an hour faster coming in on the oval. That can be some serious issues. So yes, I've seen people park before. It doesn't happen very often, but it's, in Formula One, I don't think there's any need or place for that the way they've structured it nowadays.
Yeah, and if you think about, you know, being a second off or 3 seconds off the leaders or whatever it might be, I mean, we're talking about, you know, 1/1000, 2/1000, 3. That's the difference. I mean, that's not that long of a difference if in real time, you know.
It's like 2-3 tenths a corner, right? So it's
right. Yeah. But, you know, in aggregate, yes, at the end of the race, all of a sudden you're a minute behind, and I get that. But overall, the lap, it's not like the leaders are running at such a pace that when they come up on you, they're going 100 miles an hour faster than you. Okay, that's critically dangerous, right? Yep. But, you know, Mazepin isn't that slow. You know, he's not running that slow. He's running fast as hell. It's just everyone else is running even faster.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he hasn't always been the slowest guy out there.
No.
Consistently, mostly, you would say he's averaging it, and he's in the slowest car.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you handed him a McLaren, he may not go that slow.
Right.
You know, he'd be faster than that. So they're all good drivers, but some better than others.
Yeah.
And that's you know, that's life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of us are better at things than others.
That's right.
I happen to play guitar quite a bit better than Paul does.
Yes, you do.
Right? A lot better than Paul does.
Pretty much a lot better, yeah.
But I don't drive as well as Paul does. So so anyway.
There we go. I'm happy with that equilibrium there.
Yeah, why not? You know? Either way, it impresses the people around the campfire.
Although I was singing to you before the podcast.
You were. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, the dulcet tones of Paul Charsley singing in my ear was brilliant. Right. So anyway, well, that's what we think about the US Grand Prix, but be sure to tell us what you think about the US Grand Prix. Big shout out to all of you fans that endured the bus issues. You all look fabulous. Huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We would not do this podcast without you, of course. If you weren't here to support us, then what's the point of existing? So be sure to click on the link on the parcfermé.com on the right-hand side. Click on that link. You can support us that way. If you like the podcast, go over to iTunes, give us a good rating, show us some love over there as always. And I want a big shout out to all my friends over at TalkSport. It's always fun doing TalkSport radio with those guys on a race weekend. I always enjoy that as well. They're great folks. And then, you know, we've got a couple weeks here, Paul, and then when you and I are going to come back, hopefully in my new home, and new office, instead of being stuck in the basement like a mushroom. I think I'll be on the main floor with a window of all things.
Might get some sun on you. Yeah,
might get some sun. You know.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll come back, be talking about Sergio Perez's great victory at the Mexican Grand Prix.
Whoa, there's a prediction.
How about that? Hometown boy does good.
Okay.
¿Qué pasa, amigo? No pasa nada. So anyway, that's about the extent of my Spanish. But anyway, we will be back, talk about the Mexican Grand Prix. In the meantime, I'll try to scare up Grace and see what she thinks about the U.S. Grand Prix. Until that time, we will be back next week. And this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camber, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.